Hello, everyone. Let's talk today about not believing false fronts anymore, not falling for them. Everyone puts on false fronts, and it can be very disempowering to believe in them. Not only does it, become the source of our trauma and limiting beliefs, but, being guided by others who, seem to know what they're talking about but really don't, and seem to know what's best for you but don't. It can be a very limiting, disempowering thing, and it can just be exhausting for you to be around. So, here's how to not believe those false fronts anymore and to be able to spot them from the get go. Everyone puts on false fronts. Your parents have to put on false fronts. You know, everyone puts on false fronts. And it's partly because, in order to get a lot of jobs these days, you have to put on a false front. Even going through the schooling system, you have to put on a false front. You don't have to, but oftentimes that's just the way we're conditioned, and that's sort of what we're pressured into. And personally, right now, I just feel pretty exhausted from having to be around performativity. I know I can be a bit performative sometimes, and it's just been pretty draining to be around people who are performative, especially when I fall for it, when I don't believe my intuition around it. So what really helps with this is, again, being around people who don't put on false fronts and, being in environments where you don't have to either. So, for example, kids usually don't put on false fronts because they don't have to. No one really expects a kid to put on a false front. And, kids, you just have to kind of observe the way they are. They're goofy, they're silly. They don't really care that much about how they're perceived. They just kind of go and play and act silly. And a lot of times, obviously kids aren't fully mature yet, but that doesn't mean that they can't be inspiration for you. Because genuinely being like a carefree, goofy, just fun-loving person, no one minds that. It's really good. It just, the difference between kids and adults is that kids don't really know when to switch into like a serious mode and like know how to read the room, while adults, more so do. So there's differences in that aspect. But the thing we can learn about kids is that no kid is really like a serious know-it-all like a lot of adults are. They also, don't put on like a fake smile all the time. A lot of times, they'll be having a good time, but they'll just be relaxing their face. And this is how it should be for a lot of adults. But again, due to performativity being rewarded in our society, a lot of us are conditioned out of that. A lot of us also perform because we're scared. It's like the fawn response. You try and be really nice and really agreeable in order to be liked by other people. And this can also throw other people off. The truth is, and this is the reason why a lot of people put on a front, is because everyone has trauma and limiting beliefs. We're at a stage in evolution where there's not many people who are born into families that are perfect. I mean, it's very rare. A lot of us are dealing with intergenerational trauma. And even if it's not our families that traumatize us, just the capitalist systems that we grow up in, they themselves are dealing with, patterns of performativity and just treating each other badly. So ultimately, it is just a part of our world these days. And like I said, being around kids or being around people who aren't performative is great medicine for this. And also, kind of like the second aspect of this is just improving yourself. So work on caring less what other people think, detach yourself from others, and start telling the truth yourself. I swear, the more that you are in your own power and in your own essence, the more you'll be able to spot when other people aren't. It's really like a yin and yang sort of, it kind of goes both ways. And you can also notice how a lot of times you'll be triggered by other people's fakeness or performativity. And a lot of times it's because you haven't worked out your own relationship to that within yourself. You don't like your own performativity. You don't like your own fakeness. So when you see it in someone else, it's easy to just project onto them. And thirdly, I guess I have 3 points here, is to be somewhat of a conspiracy theorist. Question institutions, question the norms. This is something that's also quite underrated. And as I started bringing power back to myself, it kind of concurrently went with just questioning the institutions that I assumed were correct most of my life, and that I was conditioned into believing were true. For example, things that were taught in the school system, or just like the culture that you're brought up in, or what you see on the news, when you see like news anchors and politicians and CEOs speaking on camera, 99.9% of the time they are being performative, they're putting on a front, and it's in the interest of their own pockets to perform like that. That's how they have come so far in their career. That's how they've moved up the corporate ladder, or whatever industry they're in. And I know some of you may not grasp this because this is kind of like different language, but a lot of this is energetic. It's an intuitive process, because ultimately you have to kind of use, like, you can't think of other people in a literal way. Obviously when people put on their performative mask, if you think too literally, you're just gonna be like, okay, well, what I see, is what I believe. But you have to kind of feel it out a little bit. A lot of times people's actions and their vibe and the words they're saying, it just won't add up. And that's how you know that someone's being a bit performative. And the scary part of this, or the kind of inconvenient part of this, is that this is most people. I swear, like the next 5 people you talk to after watching this video, I guarantee you can probably spot performative traits in all of them. So just be on top of this. Keep noticing it. Keep trusting your intuition. It is really just something that you have to gain. You have to work on your awareness of. It's an intuitive process. You feel it out. You kind of just get the vibe that they're being fake and performative. So that's that. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions or comments about this, please let me know below. I will see them. I'd love to answer them. And yeah, like and subscribe to support this channel. And I wish you all a beautiful rest of the day.